Imagine for just a second that you are sitting at your desk.
You setting the scene. I like it.
Right. So you're at your desk. You've just hit send on an email, or I don't know, maybe you've just signed off on a massive structural project, and your stomach just completely drops.
Yeah, that is the absolute worst feeling.
It really is, because you realize you have just made a colossal, totally unfixable mistake at work. Or, alternatively, imagine you're in a position of leadership and you have to deliver some truly terrible news to your team.
The kind of news that's just guaranteed to vaporize morale, right?
Exactly. News that will make everyone in the room fundamentally resent you. You can feel the panic, right? The sweat in the back of your neck, the absolute dread of the fallout.
Oh, yeah.
But what if there was a way to completely detach your name from that disaster? Like, what if there was a historically proven blueprint for keeping your reputation absolutely spotless, no matter how much chaos is happening around you?
Even when you have to make the most unpopular decisions imaginable.
Yes. Today, we are going to explore exactly that.
It is a fascinating and, frankly, a somewhat chilling premise. We are looking at strategies that have literally been refined over millennia by emperors, queens, generals.
Modern political operator.
Exactly. These are the tactics used to navigate the darkest, most treacherous waters of leadership and social dynamics without ever getting a single drop of water on themselves.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the ruthless mechanics of maintaining a pristine reputation. Specifically, we're looking at how power uses other people to do its dirty work or, to take the blame when things inevitably go wrong.
Right.
We're pulling this from excerpts of a deeply analytical text on power dynamics, specifically focusing on a chapter titled Law 26, Keep Your Hands Clean.
Which is such a great title.
It really is. And to really grasp this, we have to understand two primary archetypes that the powerful basically force others to play.
Yeah, the text lays out two fundamental pillars here. The first is the scapegoat. This is the person kept in the orbit of power specifically to take the fall when things go wrong.
A human shock absorber.
Essentially, yes. They act as a shock absorber for a leader's mistakes, or just for the unpredictable calamities of life. And the second is the cat's paw.
The cat's paw.
Right. This is the person you manipulate into doing the dangerous, the ugly, or the highly unpopular work for you. It creates a structural buffer, so your hands never even appear to be dirty in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I know these concepts sound incredibly Machiavellian. They sound super dark.
They are dark.
But understanding these mechanics is absolutely crucial for you, listening right now. Whether you're trying to elegantly navigate a complex professional hierarchy without making enemies, or, and this is probably more important, whether you want to protect yourself from being manipulated.
Because if you don't know how to spot a scapegoat or a cat's paw in the wild, there's a very high probability you might already be playing the role for someone else.
Exactly. That is the core value of examining this material. Power dynamics operate constantly in the background of our daily lives, often completely unacknowledged.
Right, and if we pretend they don't exist, we just become vulnerable to them.
Yeah.
By looking at the historical extremes of these behaviors, we get this incredible magnifying glass for the subtle, everyday ways they play out. In the boardroom, in social circles, family dynamics.
So let's dive straight into the first pillar, the scapegoat. The psychology behind this is wild, and the source material actually traces it back to the literal ancient roots of the word itself.
Yes, the concept literally originates with a goat.
An actual goat.
An actual goat. The term comes from a ritual practiced by the ancient Hebrews. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would take a live goat, physically place both of his hands on the animal's head, and confess all the sins of the children of Israel.
Wow.
Right. Through this ritual, the collective guilt of the entire community was symbolically transferred to this completely guiltless beast. The goat was then led out into the wilderness and just abandoned.
So it effectively carries the sins of the community away with it.
Exactly.
It's such a vivid, almost desperate image, taking an abstract, suffocating problem like sin or guilt or communal anxiety and just physically pushing it outside the borders of the camp.
It's very literal.
But it wasn't just goats, was it? The text notes this was a widespread human phenomenon, often involving actual human beings.
Unfortunately, yes. The Athenians, the Aztecs, among many others, used human scapegoats. Often these were individuals who were fed and raised specifically for this dreadful purpose.
That is horrifying.
It is, but you have to put yourself in the mindset of the ancient world. If a calamity struck, a sudden famine, a plague, a severe drought, They didn't have epidemiology.
Right, they didn't know about weather patterns or germs.
Exactly. They believed it was a direct punishment from the gods for human wrongdoing.
So the community is basically suffering on two fronts. They are starving or dying of disease, which is the physical disaster, but they are also suffering from this crushing psychological weight of collective blame.
Yes, they feel that they deserve it.
And that psychological burden is intolerable for a group to sustain.
Right. To free themselves from that internal pressure, they would transfer the guilt to an innocent person. The Athenians, for instance, would physically stone these individuals and drive them outside the city walls.
The act of expulsion was a psychological release valve.
Exactly.
It sounds barbaric to our modern ears, but the text makes a really profound point about why this works and why it is a fundamental, hardwired part of human psychology. It's this deep-seated, reflexive need to project guilt outward, to protect the ego.
The prevailing analysis here uses the story of Oedipus to illustrate this cognitive blind spot.
Oh, classic.
Right. So when a terrible plague is ravaging the city of Thebes, Oedipus the king launches this massive, desperate investigation to find the cause of the disaster. He looks absolutely
He
everywhere.
interrogates everyone.
Everyone. He searches every corner of the kingdom, looking everywhere except inside himself. He is completely blind to his own actions, his own sin of incest, which, in the mythology, is exactly what offended the gods and caused the plague.
It's the ultimate example of cognitive dissonance. His brain simply will not allow him to process the idea that he is the architect of his own city's destruction.
Right. When a profound mistake or a crime happens, our natural instinct is very rarely to look inward, accept blame, and just sit with the discomfort of our own fallibility.
You want to point a finger?
Always. Our instinct is to look outward and affix that blame to a convenient external object. The cleverest operators of power throughout history understand this psychological vulnerability intimately.
They know that when disaster strikes, people don't necessarily want a complex, nuanced explanation.
No, they want a target.
They want a face to put on their anger. They are hungry for closure. And that brings us to one of the most brutal yet strategically brilliant examples in the text.
The story of the 2nd century Chinese general, Ts'ao Ts'ao.
This narrative takes place during the slow, incredibly chaotic collapse of China's Han Empire.
Ts'ao Ts'ao has emerged as the most powerful man in the country, but his position is incredibly precarious. He's surrounded by enemies on all sides. He begins a massive military campaign to take control of the central plain.
And during the siege of a vital city, he makes a critical, potentially fatal error.
Under immense stress, he slightly miscalculates the timing for his grain supplies to arrive from the capital.
It's a supply chain issue. But the stakes aren't, a delayed Amazon package. The stakes are the survival of an entire army.
Exactly. They're running extremely low on food, so Ts'ao Ts'ao is forced to order his chief of commissariat.
The guy in charge of logistics and food.
Right, the executive officer. He orders him to reduce the soldiers' daily rations.
And if there is one universal rule of warfare, it's that soldiers with weapons do not like having their food cut.
Never.
Ts'ao Ts'ao runs a very tight ship with a vast network of informers, and his spies quickly report back with terrifying news. They tell him, the men are grumbling, they are openly complaining that you are living in luxury in your command tent while they are starving in the mud.
They think you are deliberately hoarding the food.
Right.
And in a military encampment of that era, grumbling isn't just complaining. It is the immediate precursor to a violent mutiny.
Ts'ao Ts'ao knows that if he doesn't act decisively to change the narrative within hours, his own army will literally tear him apart.
So he summons the chief of commissariat to his tent. And the dialogue recorded here is just chilling in its pragmatism.
It really is. Ts'ao Ts'ao looks at the man and says, I want to ask you to lend me something, and you must not refuse.
The chief, likely sensing the danger but obviously unable to decline his commander, asks what it is. And Ts'ao Ts'ao says, I want the loan of your head to show to the troops.
The loan of your head? I mean...
The chief is stunned. He naturally protests, crying out, but I've done nothing wrong. I was just following your orders.
And Ts'ao Ts'ao's response is just the ultimate distillation of Machiavellian power dynamics. He sighs, acknowledging the reality, and says, I know, but if I do not put you to death, there will be a mutiny. Do not grieve. After you're gone, I'll look after your family.
I know you are completely innocent, but I need your head anyway. It's Pure, cold arithmetic.
The chief realizes he has absolutely no leverage. He resigns himself to his fate and is beheaded that very day.
Ts'ao Ts'ao has his head placed on a tall pike for public display in the center of the camp.
Alongside a proclamation claiming the chief had been caught deliberately shorting the rations and hoarding food for himself.
And the immediate result, the soldiers stop grumbling. The crisis completely evaporates.
It's magic. But, okay, we have to look closely at the psychology of the crowd here. The text points out that many of the seasoned soldiers likely saw right through Ts'ao Ts'ao's gesture.
Well, absolutely. They weren't stupid. They knew the chief was just a bureaucrat following orders and that it was a total setup.
But they kept quiet because they were stunned and intimidated by the sheer, unhesitating violence of the act.
Partially that, yes. But the majority readily accepted his version of the story.
Why, though? If the lie is that thin, why does the majority swallow it?
Because of that psychological equilibrium we discussed earlier. The soldiers were terrified of starving, yes, but they were also terrified of the idea that their supreme commander, the man who held their lives in his hands, was incompetent.
Ah, okay.
They deeply preferred to believe that their leader was wise, just, and merely the victim of a corrupt subordinate. Believing the dead chief was to blame was psychologically safer than facing the terrifying reality that their leader had made a fatal miscalculation.
Wow. So the scapegoat allowed them to preserve their faith in the system that kept them alive.
Precisely.
So this isn't just about avoiding blame. It's about structural, plausible deniability. Let's look at Ts'ao Ts'ao's alternatives. What if he had chosen a different route?
Like what?
What if he walked out of his tent, gathered the troops, and said, "Listen, men, I take full responsibility. I miscalculated the logistics of the supply train. The roads are muddy, the carts are slow. I apologize, but we just have to tighten our belts for a few days."
If he does that, he is dead.
Literally dead.
Excuses satisfy absolutely no one when they are hungry. Furthermore, an apology from a position of absolute authority often creates a vacuum. It makes everyone uncomfortable and immediately opens up cracks of doubt about your competence.
If he admits he can't manage a supply train, why should they trust him to manage a siege?
Exactly. The text uses a really powerful medical metaphor here. It suggests that people who understand power deal with mistakes the way a surgeon deals with a tumor.
They just cut it out.
They cut it away with speed and absolute finality. An apology allows the mistake to linger, to deepen, to infect the surrounding tissue.
Right.
A swift, dramatic scapegoat cuts the issue off instantly, distracts the public's attention with a spectacle, and provides immediate emotional closure.
It instantly makes me think of modern corporate boardroom dynamics. Imagine a CEO of a massive tech company who pushes for a multi-billion-dollar pivot into a new technology.
Let's say virtual reality.
Perfect. Virtual reality. It's entirely their vision. 2 years later, the product launch completely tanks. The technology is flawed, the market isn't there, and the company bleeds billions. The shareholders are furious, institutional investors are panicking, and the stock is just plummeting.
A total disaster.
What happens? The CEO doesn't get on the quarterly earnings call and say, "I fundamentally misread the macroeconomic trends and my strategic vision was flawed."
No, never.
No, they publicly fire the mid-level VP of hardware development. They issue a press release saying, "The execution of the hardware division failed to meet our rigorous standards, and we have removed the responsible parties to ensure a renewed focus on quality."
It's exactly the same mechanic.
Yes. And just like Ts'ao Ts'ao's soldiers, the institutional investors probably know the truth. They know the CEO ordered the pivot.
But firing the VP satisfies the ritual of accountability. It stabilizes the stock, satisfies the board's need for a head on a platter, and allows the CEO's hands to remain ostensibly clean so they can continue to lead.
The scapegoat doesn't need to be the actual root cause of the problem. They merely need to be a plausible focal point for the collective anxiety.
To really drive home the sheer absurdity of how this need for a scapegoat completely overrides logic, the source material shares this fantastic, dark piece of Jewish folklore from the town of Chelm.
Oh, I love this story. In Eastern European folklore, Chelm is famously known as a town inhabited entirely by fools.
Right. So one day, the town cobbler commits a terrible crime. He murders one of his customers.
Yikes.
He is brought before the judge, the evidence is clear, and the judge sentences the cobbler to hang. But as they are preparing the gallows, a townsman stands up in court and yells, "Your Honor, you cannot hang the cobbler. He's the only cobbler we have. If you kill him, who will mend our shoes?"
And the entire town murmurs in agreement. It's a practical crisis.
Exactly. The judge, wanting to be fair to the community, strokes his beard, reconsiders, and says, you know what, the townsman makes a valid point. We only have one cobbler. It would be a great wrong to the entire community to let him die and leave us barefoot. However, since we have two roofers in town, let one of them be hanged instead.
It is so darkly funny. It's the kind of logic you'd expect from a Monty Python sketch, but it perfectly captures the underlying, unvarnished truth of scapegoating.
What's fascinating here is that the folklore of Chelm strips away all the political pretenses, all the grand speeches, and shows the bare, mechanical engine of the scapegoat.
The victim's actual guilt is completely irrelevant to the process.
The only criteria that matter are convenience and expendability. The town needs a body to hang to satisfy the psychological ritual of justice.
The murder created a psychic wound in the community that can only be closed by an execution.
Right. But they cannot afford the economic loss of losing a valuable asset like their only cobbler. So the roofer, who has done absolutely nothing wrong but happens to be redundant, becomes the most convenient vessel for the town's need for closure.
Justice in this group setting isn't about morality. It's about restoring the community's psychological equilibrium.
That is a brilliant way to frame it, restoring equilibrium.
Okay, so Ts'ao Ts'ao and the town of Chelm, they were reacting to a sudden, unexpected problem. An accident or a crime happened, the equilibrium was shattered, and they scrambled to find a fall guy.
Right, reactive.
But the text then shifts gears and asks a much more sinister, proactive question. What if you plan the scapegoat from the very beginning?
Yeah.
What if the mistake or the brutal action isn't an accident but a calculated, necessary move, and the fall guy is baked into the recipe from step one?
This transitions us from reactive damage control to proactive manipulation, and it brings us to Cesar Borgia and his actions in the year 1500. This is a masterstroke of political engineering that was so flawlessly executed it earned the highest, most enthusiastic praise from Niccolo Machiavelli himself.
High praise indeed.
Borgia, who was campaigning as the military arm for his father, Pope Alexander VI, managed to take control of Romagna, a large region in northern Italy. But Romagna was an absolute disaster.
It's a mess.
For generations, it had been ruled by weak, greedy lords who essentially just plundered it and left it lawless. It was a failed state, practically run by robbers, bandits, and violently feuding noble families.
There was no police force, no commerce, no discipline. It's the Wild West.
And Borgia, who is a brilliant administrator, knows that to make this region profitable and stable, he has to bring down the hammer.
He has to completely rebuild society from the ground up, which requires mass arrests, executions, and crushing curfews.
But he also knows a fundamental truth about human nature. The populace is going to absolutely despise whoever brings down that hammer.
Nobody loves the enforcer who executes their cousin, even if their cousin was a bandit.
Borgia foresees this friction perfectly. He knows the region requires an era of brutal, unforgiving justice, but he cannot afford to be seen as the agent of that cruelty.
Because his ultimate goal isn't just to conquer Romagna, it is to rule it peacefully for decades.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He needs the people to eventually accept him and love him as their legitimate prince. He cannot afford to carry the long-term hatred that pacifying the region will inevitably generate.
He needs what we would call today a containment strategy. He needs to outsource the hatred.
So he appoints a lieutenant general named Ramiro de Orco. Machiavelli explicitly describes de Orco as a cruel and vigorous man.
A hatchet man.
Yes. Borgia gives de Orco absolute unchecked power to clean up Romagna, essentially telling him, do whatever it takes.
And de Orco does exactly what he was hired to do. With extreme energy, efficiency, and terrifying violence, he crushes the lawlessness. He establishes a severe draconian justice system. He executes the warlords, hangs the bandits, and actually succeeds in pacifying the region.
The streets are finally safe to walk.
But precisely as Borgia predicted, in his zeal to follow orders, de Orco goes too far. He is heavy-handed, inflexible, and cruel.
After a couple of years of this martial law, the local population absolutely despises him. The fear has turned into a deep, simmering resentment against the imposition of this unforgiving justice.
The trap has been perfectly set, and now Borgia springs it.
Right. In December of 1502, once Romagna is finally orderly and the dirty work is complete, Borgia begins a whisper campaign.
He subtly starts leaking rumors throughout the region.
He lets it be known that he personally does not approve of de Orco's cruel deeds. He claims that the brutality stems entirely from the lieutenant's own vicious nature, not from Borgia's orders.
Wow, he creates structural distance between himself and his own enforcer.
Then, right before Christmas, He officially strips D'Orko of his power and throws him in prison.
And then comes the grand finale, which is pure calculated theater. The day after Christmas, the townspeople wake up and walk into the middle of the main piazza, and they find this horrifying, meticulously staged spectacle.
There is Ramiro D'Orko's headless body, dressed up in a lavish suit with a beautiful purple cape.
His severed head is impaled on a pike right next to it, and the bloody knife and executioner's block are laid out beside the head in a neat display.
The symbolism here is incredibly potent. It's not just a murder, it's a public relations event.
It's a statement.
Machiavelli's conclusion on this scene is brilliant. He wrote that the ferocity of the spectacle left the people at once stunned and satisfied.
Think about the sheer elegance of this power move. Borgia got exactly what he wanted. Clean, safe, profitable streets.
But instead of taking the blame for the blood that had to be spilled to achieve it, he engineered a scenario where he framed himself as the ultimate savior.
He descended like a benevolent, merciful angel to punish the wicked, out-of-control lieutenant.
Gaining the undying love and gratitude of the people by destroying his own proxy.
He used a hatchet man to chop down the forest, and then he publicly executed the hatchet man for holding an axe. The scapegoat was planned from day one. Borgia knew D'Orko was a dead man, walking before D'Orko even packed his bags to ride to Romagna.
This is the second iteration of the scapegoat. It is not an innocent bystander randomly grabbed to cover up a mistake, like in Chelm. It is a deliberate offensive weapon used to execute dirty work. The text advises that if you are forced to use this strategy, if you must hire someone to do something deeply unpopular, you must eventually, inevitably, separate yourself from the hatchet man.
You must leave him dangling in the wind.
Or, like Borgia, make yourself the very instrument of his downfall. You clean up the mess he made and emerge looking like a hero of the people.
But wait, if Borgia publicly executes his own top lieutenant, doesn't that make future lieutenants absolutely terrified to work for him? How do you keep hiring competent people if they know the retirement plan is getting chopped in half in a public square?
That is the exact vulnerability of this tactic, and you see it clearly in modern authoritarian regimes. Eventually, you run out of highly competent people willing to do the tough jobs because they know they're just future scapegoats.
Right.
Borgia offset this risk by paying incredibly well and by ensuring that the next lieutenant he brought in was a completely different archetype, a mild-mannered administrator. He signaled to his staff, the era of violence is over. We are now in the era of peace. He changed the context so his other employees didn't feel threatened.
That makes sense. Now, this concept of deliberately sacrificing someone close to you brings up another highly specific tactic the text calls the fall of the favorite.
Yes.
Throughout history, monarchs and powerful leaders would often have a personal favorite at court, someone they showered with immense attention, wealth, and visible favors. But if the leader's reputation was ever severely threatened, this favorite became the ultimate, highly valuable scapegoat.
It is a dark, deeply calculated move that relies on the public's inherent cynicism. The public readily assumes that a close associate must be guilty of whatever they are accused of.
Because the psychological logic of the crowd goes like this. Why would the king sacrifice his own best friend, his closest advisor, unless that friend was truly, undeniably the one to blame?
Exactly. The sheer shock of the betrayal acts as proof of the favorite's guilt.
And from a managerial perspective, the other courtiers and advisors are almost always intensely jealous of the favorite anyway. So when the favorite falls, the rest of the court rejoices.
They don't question the execution, they celebrate the power vacuum.
And for the leader, it neatly solves a secondary problem. It gets rid of a person who has likely learned far too many of the leader's dark secrets over the years and might be becoming arrogant or entitled.
Speaking of sacrificing associates to protect yourself, the text provides a fascinating example of this exact dynamic from France in 1631, involving the infamous Cardinal Richelieu and an event historically known as the Day of the Dupes.
Okay.
There was a massive, highly coordinated plot to oust Richelieu from power. It involved the highest levels of the French government, including the king's own mother, the Queen Mother.
A serious coup.
Very serious. Richelieu barely survives it, but once he regains his footing, he knows he needs to severely punish the conspirators to reestablish his dominance. However, he cannot safely arrest or execute the Queen Mother directly without triggering a catastrophic civil war.
Right. Richelieu is in a bind. One of the key architects of the plot was a man named Marillac, who was the keeper of the seals. Richelieu couldn't safely touch Marillac directly without inextricably implicating the Queen Mother and forcing an open conflict.
So how does he exert his power and send a message without touching the primary actors. He targets Marryoc's brother, who happened to be a highly respected marshal in the French army.
Now, the text explicitly notes a crucial detail. This brother had absolutely zero involvement in the political plot against Richelieu.
He was completely, unequivocally innocent. He was off fighting wars.
But Richelieu needed a high-profile body to serve as a warning to the army and the nobility. So he has the innocent brother arrested, tries him in a kangaroo court on entirely trumped-up charges of embezzlement, and has him publicly executed.
Right.
Okay, I have to stop and push back on this because strategically this seems like a massive, unnecessary risk.
How so?
If I'm a respected military general and I'm suddenly framed for a treasonous plot or financial crimes I had absolutely nothing to do with, I'm going to scream from the rooftops.
Of course.
I am going to provide alibis. I'm going to point out the fake evidence. I am going to rally my troops. Isn't a completely innocent victim going to protest so loudly and with such genuine conviction that it becomes completely obvious to the public that they're being framed? Doesn't that ruin the entire illusion of the scapegoat?
You would naturally assume so. But the source material offers a really counterintuitive, brilliant psychological insight here. It argues that choosing the most innocent victim possible is very often the wisest, most effective move a manipulator can make.
Wait, really? Why?
Because truly innocent people are almost always politically naive. They believe that the truth will set them free. Because they haven't been plotting in the shadows, they haven't built up the necessary alliances or the cunning required to fight back effectively in the ruthless arena of public perception.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense.
But more importantly, consider the optics of panic. When an innocent person is suddenly dragged to the scaffold, their frantic, desperate protests are very rarely interpreted by a cynical public as evidence of innocence.
Instead, the public views it as protesting too much.
Exactly. Their sheer desperation is misinterpreted as a manifestation of guilt.
Wow. So because they don't have the calm, practiced demeanor of a hardened criminal who has their lies prepared, their emotional volatility is used against them.
Exactly. The crowd is using a heuristic.
Yeah.
If he's screaming this loudly, he must be hiding something huge. Their actual innocence is weaponized to make them look unequivocally guilty.
That is incredibly bleak.
It is bleak, but it is a profoundly effective heuristic of power. However, the text does offer a vital caveat. It warns that you must be incredibly careful not to accidentally create a martyr.
Ah, right.
If the scapegoat appears too weak, too pathetic, or if your punishment appears sadistically cruel rather than justifiably severe, the public's sympathy might suddenly shift. The emotional current can reverse, and you could end up the victim of your own device, viewed as a tyrant rather than a savior.
Richelieu expertly navigated that subtle line by targeting a military marshal, a man with high status, wealth, and a certain degree of innate privilege. It didn't look like Richelieu was crushing a helpless, starving peasant, which would have sparked outrage.
He took down a titan, which impressed the public, even though the man was entirely innocent of the specific crime he died for.
Let's bring this into the modern era. We've talked about ancient China and Renaissance Italy, but the source material is very deliberate in showing how these exact laws of power apply across the entire modern political spectrum.
Unnecessary framing. The mechanics of power are entirely agnostic to the ideology they serve.
Right, and keeping in mind that these mechanics exist completely independently of left-wing or right-wing ideologies, we see this exact playbook utilized by some of the most famous figures of the 20th century. Just to be clear to everyone listening, we are not taking political sides here, merely impartially reporting the historical text's analysis.
Yes, the text illustrates this by pointing first to Mao Zedong. During the Cultural Revolution, a massive, society-altering initiative that failed miserably and resulted in catastrophic economic and social devastation, Mao found himself in a precarious position.
The disaster was entirely of his own making.
But following the exact psychological playbook of Ts'ao Ts'ao, Mao made absolutely no apologies or excuses to the Chinese people. He didn't admit strategic failure.
Instead, he meticulously offered up high-profile scapegoats. Most notably, he sacrificed his own personal secretary, an incredibly high-ranking party member, Chen Pota.
Mao placed the blame for the worst excesses of the revolution entirely on Chen's shoulders, purging him and thereby keeping Mao's own image as the infallible visionary chairman intact.
And then, swinging across the globe to the American political spectrum, the text examines Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Right.
FDR had this incredibly carefully crafted, almost universally beloved public reputation. He was the patrician who fought for the common man. He was known for his honesty, his fairness, and his fireside chats.
But obviously, to survive and thrive in the brutally competitive arena of American politics for decades, FDR faced countless situations where being the nice guy would have resulted in political defeat.
He needed to play dirty. He needed to twist arms, make unseemly backroom deals, and execute cutthroat campaign strategies. But he absolutely could not afford to have a single speck of dirt on his own hands, or it would ruin the brand he had built.
So for 20 long years, Roosevelt used his secretary and close advisor Louis Howe to play the exact precise role that Ramiro de Orca played for Cesare Borgia.
How was the designated hatchet man?
He's the architect of the shadows. He handled all the unsavory backroom deals, he aggressively manipulated the press, and he executed the underhanded campaign maneuvers against FDR's rivals.
And crucially, whenever a mistake was made, or whenever one of those dirty political tricks threatened to become public knowledge and tarnish FDR's golden image, Louis High immediately stepped forward into the line of fire.
He served as the ultimate loyal scapegoat. He absorbed the blame, he took the vitriol of the press, and most importantly, he never complained.
He willingly acted as the shock absorber to protect the spotless, majestic appearance of the president. It's the ultimate symbiotic relationship of power. The leader gets to operate with the ruthless efficiency of a mob boss while maintaining the public aura of a saint.
The leader gets the glory, the shadow gets the blame, and the political machine keeps moving forward unchecked.
So that extensively covers the scapegoat, the art of using someone to take the blame after the fact, or deliberately planting them to take the blame for a necessary evil.
Right.
But what if you could arrange the pieces on the board so that you never even make a visible mistake in the first place? What if you could execute your will entirely through the actions of others without them even realizing they are working for you?
This brings us to the second half of Law 26 and our second character archetype, the cat's paw.
The cat's paw.
The term is wonderfully descriptive, and it actually originates from a famous 17th century fable by the French writer Jean de La Fontaine.
Oh, I love a good fable.
In the story, a sly monkey and a simple-minded cat are sitting together by a roaring fire where some delicious plump chestnuts are roasting in the embers. The monkey desperately wants to eat the chestnuts, but he knows that reaching into the red-hot coals will severely burn his hands.
He needs the food, but he refuses the risk.
Exactly. So he turns to his friend, the cat, and begins to flatter him outrageously. He praises the cat's bravery, his agility, and his incredibly swift claws. He pumps the cat's ego up so much that he convinces the cat to pull the nuts out of the fire for him.
The cat, puffed up with pride, reaches into the flames.
He burns his paws repeatedly, wincing in pain as he pulls out the hot food one by one. And while the cat is doing all the agonizing, dangerous work, the sly monkey sits safely in the back and happily devours all the chestnuts.
It is the absolute perfect metaphor for indirect action. If there is a task that needs to be done that is deeply unpleasant, physically dangerous, or politically unpopular, it is far too risky for you to execute it yourself.
You must find a cat's paw.
You need someone to hurt the people you need hurt, or to fetch the resources you need fetched, while you remain safely in the background, keeping anyone from noticing that you are the one pulling the strings. You let someone else be the bearer of bad news or the executioner, while you ensure that you are only ever associated with joy, rewards, and glad tidings.
And this is where the historical application gets incredibly fascinating, because the text brings in one of the most famous figures in all of human history, Cleopatra.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all know the pop culture legend of Cleopatra as this ultimate seductress, a woman who used her beauty to control empires. But the source material completely reevaluates her.
It does. It argues that her true superpower wasn't seduction at all. Her superpower was supreme, unparalleled psychological manipulation.
To truly understand her tactics, we have to look closely at the traumatic environment of her childhood. When Cleopatra was just 10 years old, she witnessed her father, King Ptolemy XII, get violently overthrown and banished from Egypt by his own elder daughters, Cleopatra's older sisters.
One of these sisters, Berenice, successfully seized the throne. To secure her newly won power and eliminate rivals, Berenice overtly murdered her own husband and imprisoned her other sisters.
Which, if we are being honest about ancient history, seems like fairly standard royal behavior. You take the throne, you eliminate the claimants.
It was common, yes, but it was a massive, fatal strategic error in terms of public optics. The subjects of Egypt and the powerful factions within the court were deeply horrified that a queen would so overtly and callously exact such bloody violence on her own immediate family.
It violated deep cultural taboos.
Because of the intense public hatred she generated through her direct actions, her exiled father was eventually able to raise a foreign army, return to Egypt 4 years later, easily overthrow the deeply unpopular Berenice, and promptly have her beheaded.
So young Cleopatra is standing in the wings taking meticulous notes. She watches her sister murder family members to gain power, immediately lose the love of the people because of it, and get executed for the hubris.
She realizes, okay, rule number one of survival: do not publicly murder your own family. It is terrible for public relations.
But fast forward a few years. Her father dies. Cleopatra is 18 years old, and according to his will, she is forced to share the throne with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy III, whom she also has to marry, because that was the custom of the Ptolemaic dynasty.
Unsurprisingly, neither of them is happy sharing power. They both want absolute rule over Egypt.
The problem for Cleopatra is that her younger brother is controlled by a cabal of powerful government advisors who fear Cleopatra's intelligence and ambition. They manage to outmaneuver her, gaining the upper hand, and they force Cleopatra to flee Egypt into exile.
Now, Cleopatra is highly ambitious.
Yeah.
She wants her throne back, and she knows with absolute certainty that she has to eliminate her siblings, both Ptolemy III and her younger sister Arsinoe, who is also a threat to secure her dream of an independent, powerful Egypt.
But she remembers the brutal lesson of her sister Berenice.
She knows that if she raises an army and slaughters her siblings, the Egyptian people will never accept her. She cannot be seen shedding her own family's blood. She desperately needs a cat's paw.
Enter Julius Caesar. The most powerful man in Rome, the ultimate superpower of the era, happens to show up in Egypt pursuing a rival. Cleopatra sees her golden opportunity.
She famously sneaks back into the heavily guarded palace in Alexandria.
Legend says she had herself rolled up in a carpet that was smuggled in and unfurled right at Caesar's feet. It's brilliant theater.
She uses her charm, absolutely, but more importantly, she appeals directly to his massive ego. She presents herself not just as a lover, but as an incredibly valuable political asset who has been unjustly wronged. She essentially weaponizes Caesar's savior complex, convincing him to use his legions to restore her to the throne.
Her brother, Ptolemy III, is understandably furious. He summons the Egyptian army to attack Caesar's forces in Alexandria. Caesar, not wanting a full-scale war immediately, places the entire royal family under house arrest in the palace.
But then, a wild card. Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe, manages to escape the palace and boldly takes command of the rebel Egyptian troops surrounding the city.
And this is the moment of sheer manipulative genius from Cleopatra. The city is under siege. Cleopatra goes to Caesar and convinces him to release her brother, Ptolemy III, from house arrest.
She pitches this under the plausible pretense that her brother will go out to the rebel army and broker a peaceful truce with their sister Arsinoe.
But Cleopatra knows her brother's psychology perfectly. She knows perfectly well he will do the exact opposite. She knows he hates Caesar, he hates her, and the moment he is free, he will join Arsinoe and lead the fight against the Romans.
Wait, you need to make sure I'm picking this. She is intentionally, deliberately pushing her own brother into a direct military confrontation with the battle-hardened Roman legions.
Exactly. She is engineering a proxy war. And it plays out exactly as she meticulously planned. Her brother joins the rebels, the battle commences, and Caesar's heavily reinforced superior troops swiftly and brutally defeat the Egyptian forces.
In the chaotic aftermath of the retreat, Ptolemy III supposedly drowns in the Nile, a highly convenient death.
Caesar's forces capture Arsinoe, and she is sent back to Rome in chains to be paraded in a triumph. Furthermore, while he is securing the city, Caesar rounds up and executes all the numerous political enemies and advisors in the Egyptian government who had originally conspired against Cleopatra.
So Julius Caesar just did every single piece of her dirty work. He killed her rival brother, he imprisoned her rival sister, and he violently purged the government of all her political enemies.
And when the dust settles, Cleopatra walks back to the throne, her hands completely and utterly clean of Egyptian blood. She looks like a tragic victim whose enemies were vanquished by a foreign power.
And she didn't stop there. This became her signature strategic move. A few years later, after Caesar's assassination, she employs the exact same psychological tactic on a second Roman leader, Mark Antony.
After securing his affections and political alliance, she subtly, casually begins to hint to him that her sister Arsinoe, who is still alive, living in exile in a temple in Ephesus, is actively conspiring with his enemies to destroy him.
She frames her sister not as a threat to Egypt, but as a direct threat to Antony. Antony, thoroughly manipulated and wanting to protect his own interests, believes her. He promptly orders his men to drag Arsinoe out of the temple and execute her.
What is profoundly fascinating here is the sheer scale of the manipulation. Cleopatra successfully decimated all of her enemies, the entrenched government factions, her brother and their sister, and the two most powerful military commanders in the known world acted as her personal cat's paws.
They eagerly reached into the roaring fire, pulled out the chestnuts, and shielded her from ever appearing as a destroyer to her people.
And crucially, neither Caesar nor Antony likely ever realized they were being played. They thought they were acting entirely on their own agency, protecting their own strategic interests, or defending their honor.
It is truly mind-bending when you look at the mechanics of it. She didn't ask them for a favor. She rearranged the environment so that they wanted to kill her enemies for their own reasons.
To pivot slightly to a different cultural perspective that perfectly captures the essence of this specific dynamic, the text shares an ancient Indian tale from the Panchatantra, a collection of fables about statecraft concerning a crow, a snake, and a jackal.
Yes, there is a crow and his wife who have lived happily for years in a nest at the top of a massive banyan tree. But one day, a massive, deadly cobra moves into the hollow trunk at the bottom of the tree.
Every time the crows have chicks, the cobra slithers up and eats them.
The crows are terrified and grieving, but they love their home and don't want to abandon their tree. They know they can't fight a cobra, so they ask a wise jackal for advice. The jackal gives them a brilliant plan.
The next day, the crow's wife flies to the royal palace, where the wealthy women of the king's court are bathing in a luxurious outdoor pond.
The women have left all their priceless jewelry on the shore. The crow swoops down, grabs a heavy, solid gold chain in her beak, and flies away.
But she flies deliberately slowly, making sure the king's heavily armed guards can see her and follow her. She flies straight back to her banyan tree and drops the golden chain right down into the dark hole where the cobra lives.
The resulting chain of events is inevitable. The king's heavily armed men track the bird, climb the tree, and peer down into the hole to retrieve the royal treasure.
As they reach in, they see the swelling hood of the deadly cobra fiercely guarding the space.
Reacting to the immediate threat, the guards immediately beat the snake to death with their heavy clubs, retrieve the gold chain, and walk away.
The crows get their home back, completely safe, without ever having to engage in a suicidal fight with a predator they could never hope to defeat.
And this is where the historical text connects directly back to you, listening to this deep dive right now.
How often in your life, in your office environment, in your extended family, or in your social circles, has someone strategically dropped a golden chain in your path?
Maybe it's a tantalizing, juicy piece of gossip about a rival department that someone accidentally CCs you on.
Or maybe it's a colleague pointing out an easy opportunity for you to score points with the boss by taking down another coworker's flawed idea.
The text strongly urges us to pause in those moments and ask a critical question. Are you genuinely fighting for your own benefit, or are you just the heavily armed guard being manipulated into killing someone else's snake?
It is a vital question for navigating modern life. Dupes are everywhere. There is an endless supply of people who enjoy doing favors, who desperately want to look like heroes, who get morally outraged easily, or who are naturally aggressive.
The true Machiavellian operator doesn't try to change those people. They simply harness that energy. They drop the golden chain and let human nature do the rest.
Which brings us to an even more advanced, high-stakes application of the cat's paw strategy, something we might call strategic exhaustion.
If you can use a stronger force to destroy a weaker enemy, what if you could take it a step further? What if you could use your enemy to destroy your other enemy, saving your own strength entirely in the process?
Yes, the text provides an incredible, complex geopolitical example of this from 1930s China. We are looking at an incredibly tense civil war dynamic. On one side, you have the nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek. On the other side, you have the communists, led by Mao Zedong.
For years, Chiang Kai-shek has been ruthlessly, aggressively hunting the communists. He has nearly wiped them out entirely, forcing them into the brutal, legendary 6,000-mile retreat known as the Long March.
The animosity is absolute. It is a war of annihilation.
But then, in 1936, the tables turned dramatically and unexpectedly. Chiang Kai-shek's own soldiers, frustrated with his leadership priorities, mutiny. They capture him alive and hand him over directly to his mortal enemy, Mao Zedong.
Chiang is a prisoner he fully expects to be tortured and executed immediately. It is the logical conclusion to years of brutal warfare.
But Mao does the unthinkable. He goes against every conventional military instinct. He doesn't kill Chiang. Instead, he proposes a deal.
Around this exact same time, the Japanese Empire has begun its aggressive, large-scale invasion of China. It is an existential threat to the entire country.
Mao goes to Chiang and says, "We will let you go completely free, and we will publicly recognize you as the supreme commander of all Chinese forces, including our communist forces, if you agree to lead the united fight against the invading Japanese."
Chiang Kai-shek is stunned, but he likely thinks Mao has gone soft or is terrified of the Japanese. Chiang thinks this is perfect, I'll take command, use the combined forces to beat the Japanese, and once the Japanese are gone, I'll turn around and finish off these naive communists once and for all. He eagerly agrees to the deal.
Now wait, I have to push back here, because looking at this from a strategic perspective, this sounds insanely risky, bordering on suicidal. Mao finally has his most dangerous, relentless enemy in captivity, and instead of ending the threat, he hands that enemy supreme command of the army.
What if Chiang Kai-shek defeats the Japanese, gains a ton of momentum, captures Japanese weapons, and just immediately turns around and wipes Mao off the map? Isn't Mao essentially giving his worst enemy a massive promotion and a reprieve?
You are completely right to point that out. It appears as a massive, almost foolish gamble on the surface. And historical records show that many of Mao's own top generals were absolutely terrified and furious at this decision. They thought he was throwing away their only chance at survival.
But the text explains that this specific strategy requires the ability to plan several moves ahead, like a grandmaster chess player visualizing the ricochets and the inevitable attrition of a long game. This is the implementation of the double cat's paw.
Mao understood a fundamental concept of asymmetric warfare. He knew exactly how the two respective armies fought. The communists were fundamentally a guerrilla force. They fought using hit-and-run tactics, hiding in the mountains, preserving their numbers, and avoiding direct pitched battles.
The nationalists under Chiang were a traditional conventional army that fought head-on, standing in lines, holding territory.
By putting Qing in charge of the United Front, Mao virtually guaranteed that Chiang's conventional army would bear the absolute grinding brunt of the horrific Japanese artillery, armor, and air support.
For several agonizing years, they fight the Japanese. And indeed, eventually, the United Front succeeds in pushing the Japanese out of mainland China. But when the dust settles and the celebrations end, Mao's true, chilling plan is fully revealed.
The outcome is exactly what Mao predicted. The nationalists are absolutely decimated. Yes, they did the incredibly hard work of evicting the Japanese superpower, but their forces are totally exhausted. Their numbers are massively depleted by years of brutal, meat-grinder conventional warfare.
Meanwhile, what were the communists doing? Because they were using guerrilla tactics, they rarely took direct hits from the Japanese.
They used those years of war to quietly recoup their strength, spread out into the rural villages, recruit heavily, and gain massive political influence all over the countryside while the nationalists were busy bleeding on the front lines.
As soon as the war with Japan officially ends, the truce evaporates and the Chinese Civil War immediately resumes. But the power dynamic has completely inverted. This time, Mao's fresh, expanded forces easily envelop and crush Chiang's weakened, battered army.
It is a masterclass in strategic exhaustion. Think out the layers of manipulation here. The Japanese military served as Mao's first cat's paw. They inadvertently plowed the fields for him by systematically destroying the nationalist strength.
And the nationalists were his second cat's paw, doing the incredibly heavy, bloody lifting required to remove the Japanese invaders.
Mao took what looked like a massive step backward, letting his worst enemy go free to achieve a giant, unassailable leap forward. It is the pinnacle of saving energy and effort. Why waste the lives of your own soldiers in a bloody war of attrition if the superior firepower of an invading army can do the destructive job for you completely for free?
It requires such intense psychological discipline to not take the immediate satisfying revenge of executing Chiang when he had him captive. It's about suppressing your ego and letting the aggressive players on the board exhaust each other.
It's like watching two massive tech companies burn billions of dollars in a decade-long legal and price war over a new market, only for a third, quieter company to swoop in and acquire the weakened winner for pennies on the dollar.
And there's another fascinating story from Chinese history that perfectly illustrates this idea of using your enemy's own energy and resources against them. It's the story of Zhuge Liang, an absolutely legendary 3rd century strategist.
Yes, the story of the arrows. Zhuge Liang finds himself in a desperate political situation. He is falsely accused of treason by his own jealous supreme commander. The commander wants Liang dead, but wants it to look legitimate.
To prove his loyalty, the commander gives Liang a completely impossible task: produce 100,000 arrows for the army within 3 days, or be executed for dereliction of duty.
Which, with the technology and manpower of the 3rd century, is physically impossible to manufacture from scratch in 72 hours. He's being set up to fail.
Exactly. It's an execution sentence disguised as a task. So Zhuge Liang, understanding the reality, doesn't even attempt to have his men start carving wood or forging arrowheads. He waits.
He waits until the late afternoon of the 3rd day, a time when he knows a thick, impenetrable mist always blankets the river, separating them from the enemy encampment.
He takes a dozen small boats, heavily lashes thick bundles of straw to their sides to create soft walls, and floats them slowly, quietly toward the enemy camp on the opposite bank.
The enemy sentries, peering through the heavy fog, see the vague, looming shapes of a fleet of boats emerging from the mist. Because of the fog, they can't see who was on them or how many men are attacking. They immediately fear a massive surprise ambush.
Because they are terrified, they don't send their own boats out to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Instead, they do exactly what a frightened army does. They stand safely on the bank and unleash an absolutely massive, continuous shower of arrows at the approaching silhouettes.
The boats inch closer, and the enemy, panicking that the boats aren't sinking, redoubles their fire. Thousands upon thousands of arrows fly through the air and sink deep into the thick protective straw covering the boats.
After several hours of this barrage, the handful of men hiding safely below deck on Liang's boats simply turn around and quickly sail downstream with the current.
Zhuge Liang meets them at the docks, casually plucks 100,000 perfectly good, undamaged arrows out of the straw, and delivers them to his stunned commander, saving his own life.
He literally manipulated the enemy into manufacturing and delivering the exact weapons he needed to survive. It's brilliant.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of power dynamics, the key element Liang utilized here is the weaponization of ambiguity. Disguising your intentions is crucial.
The mist represents a lack of information.
When your rivals cannot be entirely sure what you are due or what you are after, their paranoia will force them to react. And more often than not, they will overreact in ways that actually work in your favor in the long run. By presenting a vague, undefined threat, Liang forced an overly aggressive, fearful enemy to expend their own resources, and their reaction was exactly what he needed. He made their paranoia his cat's paw.
Okay, so we've talked extensively about emperors, queens, and brilliant generals fighting literal wars of survival. But let's bring this down to earth. Let's look at how these ruthless laws apply to everyday, seemingly polite social dynamics. Because the text makes a compelling argument that the cat's paw is just as effective, if not more so, in a quiet sitting room, a corporate office, or a delicate negotiation as it is on a bloody battlefield.
Yes, the source material transitions beautifully into the nuanced realm of social grace, favors, and obligations. It illustrates this by telling the story of Kuriyama Daisen, an adept of the highly ritualized Japanese tea ceremony in the 1620s.
Daisen has a good friend named Hoshino Somen. Somen is a deeply proud, honorable man. But he has gotten himself into a severe financial crisis. He borrowed a large sum of money, 300 ryo, from a wealthy local merchant to help a struggling relative.
To put that into perspective, 300 ryo in the 1620s would be roughly equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today. It is a crushing, ruinous debt. And now, Somen is trapped. He cannot pay it back, and he is facing ruin and disgrace.
Daisen is wealthy and wants to help his friend. But he knows human nature. He knows that if he simply walks up and offers his friend the massive pile of cash to pay off the debt, Somen's immense pride will be deeply wounded.
He will feel infantilized. He will feel permanently burdened by the heavy obligation of the favor, and it might even permanently destroy their friendship, replacing equality with subservience.
It's a classic problem. A direct favor of that magnitude is incredibly heavy. It creates an uncomfortable, often resentful power dynamic between equals. So Daisen decides he has to be elegant. He has to use indirect power.
He visits Somen's house for tea. While they are chatting, Daisen notices a beautiful painting by a famous master hanging on the wall. Daisen immediately starts praising it profusely. "This is splendid. I've never seen anything I like better. The brushwork is magnificent."
He goes on and on, lingering on it, until Somen, who is bound by the strict cultural rules of Japanese hospitality, feels compelled to say, "Well, my friend, since you admire it so much, please, you must accept it as a gift."
Daisen feigns polite reluctance, but eventually accepts the painting and takes it home. The very next day, Daisen sends a messenger to Somen's house with a carefully wrapped package.
Inside the box is a delicate, absolutely priceless tea vase made by Senno Rikyu, who is considered the greatest of all historical tea masters. The vase even bears a personal inscription from the emperor. It is an artifact of unimaginable value.
Dazen includes a casual note saying, "Please accept this small token of my deep appreciation for the lovely painting you gave me. By the way, if you don't happen to care for the vase, I hear that the merchant you owe money to is an obsessive collector of tea artifacts and has always desperately wanted this specific piece. You might be able to arrange an exchange with him for that IOU you mentioned."
Someone opens the box, reads the note, and immediately understands exactly what his friend has brilliantly engineered. He takes the priceless imperial vase to the merchant.
The merchant is absolutely floored. He is so eager to have the piece that he not only gives someone his canceled debt note back, but actually offers him a huge sum of extra money on top of it.
Summon simply takes the canceled debt, goes directly to Dazen's house, and profoundly thanks him for his incredible, clever, and graceful support.
The analysis of this interaction is crucial for understanding social power. Dazen deliberately made himself the cat's paw. He desperately wanted to solve his friend's problem, but he knew a direct, blunt approach would cause offense and rupture the relationship.
By maneuvering Summon into giving him the painting first, he allowed Summon to feel that he too had provided value. He allowed his friend to maintain his dignity.
Dazen lost a priceless vase, yes, but he gained a beautiful painting, and infinitely more importantly, he gained the profound, lasting, and unburdened loyalty of his friend without ever making him feel small or indebted.
An indirect favor has 10 times more power than a direct one. A direct favor feels like a transaction or a chain. An indirect favor feels like a grace. It completely avoids the resentment that charity often breeds and creates an elegant, clean foundation of power.
That principle of indirect action doesn't just apply to physical gifts, it applies heavily to information. The text notes that using planted information is one of the absolute easiest, most common ways to use a dupe in the modern world. You feed someone a specific piece of information, knowing exactly what their psychological profile is, how they will predictably react to it, and exactly who they will run and pass it to.
Yes, the source material provides a brilliant, slightly humorous, modern example from the realm of strategic psychology involving Dr. Milton H. Erickson, a highly influential psychiatrist.
Dr. Erickson frequently encountered a very specific, difficult dynamic in his practice. A married couple, where the wife desperately wanted to engage in couples therapy to fix the marriage, but the husband absolutely, stubbornly refused to participate or even step foot in the therapist's office. He thought therapy was nonsense.
Instead of arguing with the absent husband or telling the wife to give ultimatums, Dr. Erickson would use the wife as an informational cat's paw.
During her solo sessions, as she talked about her marriage, Dr. Erickson would deliberately offer interpretations of the husband's behavior that he knew were highly provocative, slightly insulting, and aimed directly at the husband's pride. He would say things that would absolutely infuriate the husband if he were to hear them.
And of course, human nature is entirely predictable. The wife goes home, they get into a conversation, and she says, "You don't believe what the therapist said about your relationship with your mother today." She repeats the highly provocative interpretations word for word.
Exactly. And after a few weeks of sitting at home and hearing these infuriating, seemingly condescending secondhand analyses of his character, the husband's ego can't take it anymore. He becomes so enraged that he storms into the therapist's office the following week, specifically to set the doctor straight and defend his pride.
But by walking through the door and trying to correct the doctor, he is now sitting in the chair. He is actively participating in therapy. Dr. Erickson used the wife's natural tendency to share to pull the husband into the room without ever having to ask him directly, completely bypassing his initial wall of refusal.
It's the exact same mechanic utilized by the famous early 20th century con artist Joseph Weil, famously known as the Yellow Kid. Weil was a master of exploiting the credibility gap.
Weil knew that if he, a slick, fast-talking stranger in a nice suit, walked directly up to a wealthy, cynical businessman and pitched a crazy high-yield investment scheme, the target's defenses would be up instantly. The guy would be immediately suspicious of a cold pitch.
So Weil would never approach the target directly. Instead, he would find a cat's paw, usually a lower-level, ambitious but trusted subordinate of the wealthy target, an assistant, a junior partner, or a secretary. Weil would pitch the scheme exclusively to the subordinate. He'd use all his charm to convince this subordinate that the opportunity was real, exclusive, and incredibly lucrative.
And again, because human nature is highly predictable, Weil knew what would happen next. The subordinate, desperately wanting to impress his wealthy boss or wanting to increase the investment pool so he could get a cut, would naturally take the scheme directly to the wealthy target himself.
The wealthy boss wouldn't immediately suspect a trap because the pitch wasn't coming from a stranger off the street. It was coming from inside his own house. It was coming from his own trusted employee. The employee, acting as the cat's paw, inadvertently establishes the credibility of the con and completely shields the manipulator from the target's initial critical scrutiny. The target lowers his defenses because he trusts the messenger.
It's fascinating. You can also, on rare occasions, choose to be the cat's paw voluntarily if the target is right and the potential reward is high enough. The text briefly mentions the famous, likely apocryphal but deeply illustrative story of Sir Walter Raleigh. He famously took off his expensive, heavy velvet cloak and laid it over a muddy puddle so Queen Elizabeth wouldn't get her royal shoes dirty as she walked.
Yes, voluntarily acting as the protective instrument for someone vastly more powerful than you, willingly taking a small hit to your own dignity, your time, or your property to visibly shield them from unpleasantness can yield massive dividends. It is the ultimate move of the perfect courtier. It silently signals absolute loyalty and utility, which powerful people constantly crave and richly reward.
Okay, so we've covered a massive amount of ground here. We've talked about the mechanics of blaming the innocent, the strategy of sacrificing close friends, the genius of tricking enemies into fighting each other, and the subtle art of manipulating therapists and con marks.
Right.
So stepping back and looking at the totality of Law 26, what does this all mean? Is this just a flawless, foolproof system for endless, clean, sociopathic power? Can you just smoothly cat's paw your way through life and business forever without ever facing consequences?
This raises an important question, and it brings us to the final analytical section, the reversal. The source material is incredibly clear and issues a stark warning. These strategies, while historically effective, are incredibly fragile.
A scapegoat, or a cat's paw, is, at its core, a screen. It is an illusion designed to hide your direct involvement. But if that screen is ever lifted, if the public, your employees, or your enemies suddenly realize that you are the actual puppet master pulling the strings in the dark, the dynamic completely and violently inverts.
You will suddenly be blamed not just for the initial dirty deed or the mistake, but you will be doubly punished for the deception itself. The resentment generated by being tricked is often far worse than the anger over the original offense.
The blowback is atomic. And there is perhaps no better, bloodier historical example of this catastrophic failure than Catherine de' Medicis in France in the year 1572.
Catherine is the incredibly powerful Queen Mother of France. She is secretly pulling the strings behind her son, the young king. She decides she desperately needs to eliminate a man named Gaspard de Coligny. Coligny is a powerful admiral and a leading, charismatic member of the Huguenots, who were the French Protestants. Coligny is gaining too much influence over Catherine's son, and she feels her grip on power slipping.
So she decides he needs to die. But, knowing the rules of power, she uses a cat's paw. She secretly arranges for a member of the Guise family, a massive, incredibly powerful Catholic royal plan to carry out the assassination.
Her strategic plan was an ambitious double cat's paw, very similar in theory to Mao's use of the Japanese, but with significantly less control over the variables. She wanted Coligny dead to protect her influence, and she deeply hoped that the Huguenots would immediately blame the Guise family for the murder. She anticipated that the two massive factions, the Protestants and the hardline Catholics, would tear each other apart in a cycle of revenge, effectively erasing two of her major political rivals from the board with one single bullet.
It's a bold plan, but the golden, unbreakable rule of using an assassin or a proxy is they better not miss. And the Guise assassin misses. He only wounds Coligny.
Coligny survives the attempt, and he is a seasoned military commander, not a fool. He immediately realizes that the Guise wouldn't dare act alone on such a high-profile target without royal backing. He quickly deduces that Catherine is the mastermind, and he goes straight to the young king and tells him exactly what his mother has done.
The screen is abruptly lifted. The illusion shatters. Catherine's direct involvement is fully exposed to the court and the rival factions. The failed assassination and the ensuing panic that her plot has been discovered spiral completely and rapidly out of her control.
Terrified of a Huguenot uprising and retaliation, Catherine's botched proxy attack triggers a chain reaction of intense paranoia and preemptive violence. It explodes into a horrific, bloody civil war, culminating just days later in the infamous massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, where thousands of innocent Protestants were indiscriminately slaughtered in the streets of Paris and across France.
The text uses this to issue a dire warning. If you use a cat's paw for an action of massive, irreversible consequence, like a political assassination, destroying a rival company, or toppling a government, too much can go wrong. The variables are too complex. It is far wiser to reserve these tools of manipulation for more innocent endeavors, like delicate social favors, gathering information, or minor political maneuvering, where a miscalculation or an exposed screen won't result in catastrophic historical blowback.
Because if you get caught holding the smoking gun and you get caught trying to cowardly frame someone else for it, your reputation isn't just tarnished, it is destroyed forever. You lose all moral authority.
Which brings up one final fascinating twist from the text. The reversal states that sometimes keeping your hands meticulously clean isn't actually the right move at all. Sometimes you actually should dirty your hands, and you should make sure you do it very publicly.
Yes, the text outlines two highly specific strategic scenarios where taking direct, visible responsibility is actually advantageous to maintaining power.
The first scenario is playing the penitent. If you are already highly secure in your position of power, if your throne is safe, or your board fully supports you, stepping forward and voluntarily taking the blame for a mistake can actually enhance your public reputation. With a sorrowful look, you stand before the cameras or the crowd and ask for forgiveness. You say, the buck stops here.
It makes you look incredibly noble, sacrificial, and deeply human. It is the calculated ploy of a leader who appears willing to suffer for the good of their people.
It's a fantastic PR move, but it only works if you have the underlying power to ensure you won't actually be fired or executed for the mistake. It's performative vulnerability.
Precisely. It is a luxury of the secure. The second scenario where you should dirty your hands is the application of the mighty hand. Occasionally, a leader needs to act directly as the visible agent of punishment to instill a necessary level of fear and respect.
Instead of hiding behind a cat's paw or a proxy, you show your own raw power. You strike down an enemy openly and decisively to remind everyone in your orbit that you are dangerous and capable of violence, whether that's literal violence in the ancient world or firing a toxic executive in the modern corporate world.
However, the text stresses that this card must be played exceedingly sparingly. If you become the visible, constant punisher too often, that necessary fear will inevitably curdle into deep resentment. And eventually, as history shows us time and again, that accumulated resentment will unite your disparate enemies and bring you down. The baseline, foundational rule remains. Get in the habit of using a cat's paw. It is far safer to let others do the striking.
So, synthesizing all of this incredible history and psychology, the core philosophy underlying this text is an acknowledgement that the world is inherently chaotic and unpredictable. Mistakes are going to happen. You're going to make bad strategic calls, supply chains are going to fail, markets are going to crash, and deals are going to fall through.
According to these historical sources, true, lasting power doesn't lie in the impossible goal of attaining perfection and never failing. True power lies in meticulously, structurally controlling the narrative of who takes the fall when the failure happens, the scapegoat, and who absorbs the risk of action in the first place, the cat's paw.
And that is the exact analytical lens I would encourage you, listening to this right now, to apply to your own life starting today. Look closely at your workplace, examine your social circles, and observe the dynamics of your community organizations.
Are you the person who is always volunteering or being subtly nudged by colleagues to deliver the bad news to the angry client? Are you the one who always inexplicably ends up absorbing the blame when a collaborative project goes off the rails, somehow protecting a flawless superior who never seemed to get reprimanded? If you find yourself constantly in the heat of the fire, pulling out the chestnuts while someone else safely eats them, you might be someone else's cat's paw.
It's a deeply sobering thought. We all like to fiercely believe that we are entirely in control of our own actions and our own destinies. But this deep dive shows, with historical certainty, just how easily our own egos, our pride, or our naivete can be maneuvered into fighting battles that aren't actually ours.
Right.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to ponder as we wrap up. We all know those leaders. Maybe it's a politician you see on the news, a celebrity, or a high-profile CEO you admire, whose hands seem truly miraculously spotless. They never visibly make a mistake. They always seem to float above the fray, untainted by scandal, only ever arriving at the podium to announce good news or record profits.
Does that pristine, flawless image mean they are actually perfect? Or does it just mean that their graveyard of scapegoats is expertly hidden in the shadows?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of power. Stay curious, watch your back, and whenever possible, keep your hands clean.